The scent hit Kaelen Reese before the doors even opened. Sweet. Foreign. Wrong. It moved through the mansion like something that had been waiting, thick, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Kaelen stood at the far end of the grand entrance hall, rain still dripping from the collar of his coat, one hand pressed flat against the marble wall. He knew that smell. Fresh bond pheromones. Not his. His fingers curled slowly against the cold stone. The front doors swung open. Thorne Vael walked in. Tall. Dark-coated. Moving like a man who had never once in his life questioned whether he belonged in a room. Because he hadn't. The Alpha King of the Vael dynasty. The most feared name in 3 underworld territories east of the Mississippi. The man whose empire stretched from corporate boardrooms to criminal networks that governments couldn't trace and rivals couldn't dismantle. And the man Kaelen had loved, completely, without conditions, without keeping score, for 3 years. Thorne didn't look at him right away. That was the first sign. Not guilt. Not hesitation. Just the particular kind of not looking that means someone has decided, in advance, that they don't owe you eye contact. Hi viewers, have you ever stayed somewhere you already knew was breaking you, just because leaving felt more terrifying than the pain? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I want to read every single one. Kaelen watched Thorne shrug off his coat. Watched him hand it to a servant without a word. Watched his jaw stay set, not tight with guilt, not loose with apology. Unbothered. That was worse than anger. Thorne finally turned. Their eyes met across 40 feet of marble floor and chandelier light and 3 years of accumulated silence. 1 second. 2. Nothing. No explanation offered. No softness extended. Not even the basic dignity of a constructed lie. Kaelen's chest didn't collapse dramatically. It didn't shatter the way it did in the kind of stories people told about heartbreak. It did something quieter. And more permanent. It went cold. He thought about the dinners eaten alone at a table set for 2. The beds that had started feeling like furniture. The palace staff who stopped meeting his eyes 18 months ago, not out of disrespect, but out of the particular discomfort of people who know something about your life that you haven't admitted to yourself yet. He had given Thorne every excuse available. Stress. Business pressure. The specific exhaustion of men who carry empires. He had rebuilt Thorne's reasons from scratch every single morning for 2 years and handed them back like offerings. Every single one. His hand dropped from the wall. Moved, almost without his permission, down to his stomach. Flat. Still. But not empty. No one in this mansion knew what Kaelen was carrying. Not the servants who watched him leave rooms. Not Thorne's brothers. Not the security staff who logged every person who came and went through the estate's monitored gates. Not Thorne. Especially not Thorne. And in that moment, standing under a chandelier that cost more than most people's homes, soaked through, invisible to the man who was supposed to choose him every single day, Kaelen made a decision. Not in rage. Not in performance. In absolute, bone-level clarity. He turned. Walked upstairs. Closed the bedroom door without a sound. And began to pack. His hands didn't shake. That was the detail nobody would believe later, if there was ever a later in which this story got told. Kaelen moved through the bedroom with the particular calm of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times without ever consciously planning to use it. A worn leather bag pulled from the back of the closet. The hidden ultrasound photograph. Folded inside a small white envelope, tucked between 2 undershirts for 3 months without ever being found, placed carefully at the bottom. A lace baby blanket. Barely bigger than a hand towel. Soft. And used. Hidden in the same way Kaelen had been hiding everything that mattered for the past year. Old identification papers. Emergency cash. Nothing else. He didn't take the jewelry from the early years, back when Thorne still noticed him, still reached for him across rooms. Didn't take the watch. Didn't take the photograph from their bonding ceremony that sat framed on the dresser like a monument to something that had quietly, methodically stopped being real. He looked at that photograph once. Looked at who they had been in it. Then left it exactly where it was. The hallway outside the bedroom was dim. 2 servants stationed near the main staircase. Both of them turned when Kalin stepped out with the bag over one shoulder. Both of them saw him. Neither spoke. Neither moved. He kept walking. That silence was its own kind of verdict. Not surprising, that was what made it land so hard. Because it meant somewhere among the people who moved through this house every day, his departure wasn't an emergency. It was something they had been quietly expecting. He pushed through the side exit. Rain hit immediately. Cold. Fast. The kind that comes sideways. No umbrella. No waiting car. No plan that extended past the next 60 minutes. He walked anyway. The iron estate gates groaned open on their sensors as he approached. Beyond them, darkness. A long private road lined with trees bending sideways in the storm. He stepped through the gate. Didn't look back. What he couldn't have known, what was entirely invisible from ground level, was the figure standing at the upper balcony window. Still. Watching. Luceran Vael. The middle triplet. Not the loudest. Not the one the underworld whispered about by name in the same breath as Thorne. The one they feared without fully understanding why, the way people fear weather. Dark eyes. A stillness that wasn't peace, it was something more controlled than peace. A glass of whiskey in his right hand that he had not touched in 20 minutes. He watched Kaelen disappear into the storm. His jaw tightened. Just slightly. He set the glass down, carefully, without sound, and reached for his phone. One contact in the list. No name. Just a number. It rang once. "He's moving," Luceran said. Quietly. Precisely. "Track him. Don't touch him. Don't speak to him." He ended the call. Stood at the window a moment longer. Then said, so quietly it barely qualified as sound. "You finally chose survival." Thorne Vael was not a man who panicked. He had sat across from cartel leaders and kept his hands flat on the table. Had read casualty reports from operations that went wrong and responded with strategy, not emotion. Had buried men who were supposed to be untouchable and attended their funerals without flinching. But the moment he stepped into that bedroom, cold sheets. Open dresser drawer. Kaelin's scent already fading from the air like something being carefully, deliberately erased. Something cracked open inside him that had no name and no protocol. He stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds. Then turned hard. Devante. His head of security appeared from the hallway in under 10 seconds. Coat still on. Reads the room in one look. Kaelen. Where is he? Not a question. Devante didn't answer fast enough. Thorne moved 1 step forward. Where is he? He left the estate on foot, sir. Approximately 40 minutes ago. Side exit. No vehicle requested. The gate sensors logged his departure at 40 minutes. Silence fell over the hallway like something physical. Devante did not breathe. 40 minutes? Thorne had spent 40 minutes in this house. Eating, changing, issuing routine instructions to staff, while his mate walked out into a storm carrying whatever he could fit in one bag. Find him. The words came out quiet. Everyone within earshot knew what quiet meant from Thorne Vael. It meant the next version of this conversation would not be quiet at all. Every car. Every contact we have in the city. I want his location in 10 minutes. The hallway moved. Phones out. Footsteps branching in 4 directions. Doors opening and closing. Thorne stood perfectly still in the center of it, the way the eye of something dangerous stays still while everything around it moves fast. He turned to the window. Rain against glass. Nothing visible past the tree line. You noticed too late. The voice came from behind him. Unhurried. Measured. Like a man observing something that had already finished happening. Luceran. Thorne turned. His brother stood in the bedroom doorway. Arms loose at his sides, expression showing nothing that resembled surprise. That was the detail. Not the words. The absence of surprise. You knew, Thorne said. Luceran said nothing. You watched him leave. Thorne's voice dropped to the register that meant he was working very hard at control. And you didn't stop him. No. Luceran tilted his head slightly. I didn't. Why? A pause long enough to function as its own answer. Because he had every right to go. Thorne crossed the room. 4 steps. Luceran didn't move back by a single inch. I know where he is, Luceran said before Thorne reached him. Quiet. Offered like directions to somewhere unremarkable. I've known since he passed the gate. Thorne's hands were at his sides. Both of them closed. Tell me. Luceran looked at him. One long, steady, entirely unintimidated look. Then said, with a calm so complete it was almost clinical. No. Thorne Vael had spent his entire adult life being the most powerful man in any room he entered. Not by accident. By construction. By decades of decisions, sacrifices, and the specific willingness to do things other men wouldn't, to hold positions other men would release under pressure, to look at consequences directly and not flinch. The Vael Empire was not inherited in full. It was built, floor by floor, on the foundation of Thorne's singular authority. He had always assumed his brothers operated somewhere inside that structure. Beneath it. He was wrong. You have no authority here, Luceran said. No heat in it. No performance. The flat delivery of someone stating a fact about geography. Not in this. Thorne stared at him. This is my mate. Your mate left. Luceran moved to the chair in the corner of the bedroom and sat down, unhurried, fully in control of his own body the way men are when they've already decided how a conversation ends. That is a meaningful distinction. It changes what authority you have over the situation. What do you want from me, Luceran? You want me to say I failed him? Fine. I failed him. I don't want anything from you. Luceran glanced once at the window. I want you to understand what you're actually looking at. He reached into his coat. Pulled out a phone. Set it on the side table between them and turned the screen face up toward Thorne. Real-time location data. Kalen's movement, mapped and timestamped from the moment he stepped through the estate gate. Clean. Precise. Every point logged with the kind of detail that required infrastructure, not one person with a phone, but a system. Thorne looked at the screen. Then looked closer. The log didn't start tonight. It went back weeks. Months. Appointments he hadn't known about. Locations he hadn't asked about. A full, continuous record of a life being lived inside his house that he had stopped paying attention to. He looked up slowly. How long have you been tracking him? 2 years. The room absorbed that number in silence. 2 years. Thorne repeated it without inflection, the way you repeat something you need to hear again before you can process it. Protecting him, Luceran said. There is a difference between tracking and protecting. One of you needed to be doing it. Thorne wanted anger. The anger was available, hot, ready, right at the surface. But underneath it was something he had less experience handling. Something that didn't have a protocol. His younger brother. The one who read instead of networked. who came to family dinners and said little and was categorized, consistently and incorrectly, as the least dangerous of the three. This man had been running a private operation. Analysts, rotating security personnel, shell company properties, political contacts Thorne hadn't known existed, all of it built parallel to the Vael Empire, not underneath it. For 2 years. For Kaelen. Why? Thorne said. The anger was gone. What replaced it was rawer than anger. Luceran stood. His expression didn't change. But his voice, in the specific way a voice changes when a person stops managing it and lets one true thing through, shifted. Because someone should have protected him from the beginning. He picked up the phone. Pocketed it. Moved toward the door. And you were too busy being king to notice he needed it. He stopped at the doorframe. Didn't turn around. Kaelen is cold and alone tonight, and he is carrying something that will change every calculation you've been making since you walked through those doors. Thorne went completely still. What does that mean? Luceran stepped into the hallway. It means you should have been paying attention. Kaelen's legs gave out 3 blocks from the church. Not in the road. Not dramatically. He made it to the stone steps first, old, rain-slicked, tucked behind an overgrown hedge that hadn't been trimmed in 2 seasons, and sat down hard, leather bag pulled tight against his chest, breathing in deliberate pulls. The cold had moved past his skin and into his bones somewhere around the 2nd mile. He hadn't planned this well. He understood that now with complete clarity. No car. No hotel reservation made in advance under a name Thorne's contacts wouldn't recognize. The one person he had considered calling, Darius, his closest friend from before, the one who had known him before any of this, had moved to Atlanta 2 years ago. Everyone else in his life had either drifted naturally or been kept carefully at arm's length by the gravitational weight of being bonded to a veil. His stomach cramped. Low. Sharp. Gone in 4 seconds. He pressed his palm flat against it. Okay, he said quietly. To no one. Just to the rain, which did not respond. Okay. The church shelter had been closed for 2 years. He could see that now, from the boarded entrance and the hand-lettered sign above it. What remained was the covered stone alcove. Wide enough to block the sideways rain. Deep enough to sit without being visible from the road unless someone was specifically looking. He didn't know exactly how long he sat there. Long enough for his coat to stop actively dripping. Long enough for the cramp to return twice and ease twice, both times with the specific quality of something reminding him it was there. Long enough to begin, carefully, honestly, questioning not whether he'd been right to leave, but whether he'd been reckless about how. 3 months alone. $600 in cash. His name, attached to the Vael estate in every database that mattered, making any hotel transaction a traceable event within hours of completion. He had nowhere to go. That thought sat with him. Didn't spiral, just settled, honest and cold, like the second layer of the rain's temperature. Then headlights. Moving slowly. A black car pulling to a complete stop at the curb directly in front of the alcove steps. Not rushing. No dramatic arrival. Just presence. Kaelen was on his feet immediately. Bag in hand. Heart rate spiking. Thorne. He was already mapping exits. Left, the gap between the 2 buildings, the block behind the shelter, 3 turns and he'd be in a neighborhood dense enough to lose a tail. The car door opened. The man who stepped out was not Thorne Vael. Leaner. Quieter. Dark coat, no tie, an umbrella already open and angled against the wind before he'd fully straightened. Luceran. He walked up the 2 stone steps without hurrying. Stopped at the top. Looked at Kaelen the specific way a person looks at something they have been worried about, concretely, practically worried about, for a long time. I'm not here to take you back, he said. Kaelen didn't lower the bag. Then why are you here? Luceran's answer came after a pause, long enough to be chosen, not reflexive. Because your child deserves safety. The words landed. Kaelin's body went still in the specific way that happens when something true reaches you before your defenses do. The rain kept falling. The umbrella kept the worst of it off Luceran's shoulders. He didn't step closer. Didn't reach out. Didn't fill the silence with reassurances that would have immediately felt false. He waited. With the patience of someone who had been doing exactly that, waiting, watching, building contingencies, for much longer than tonight. And Kaelen, exhausted and cold and 3 months along and carrying 40 miles of emotional damage in both shoulders, felt something he had not felt inside those mansion walls in longer than he could accurately calculate. Seen. Not managed. Not tolerated. Seen. He didn't know whether to trust it. He didn't know if trust was safe here. He only knew his legs were shaking. And Luceran had already noticed. The penthouse door locked automatically behind them. Kaelen heard it, one clean, soft click. And then the sound of the storm disappeared entirely, swallowed by triple-pane glass and the specific, climate-controlled silence of a space built for people who have decided the outside world only enters on their terms. He stood in the center of the living room and did not move. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Warm, low light from recessed fixtures. A couch that had been chosen by someone who understood both comfort and intimidation. And on the kitchen counter, a medical bag, open, already fully stocked. Already. That word stopped him completely. The bag had been packed before tonight. Before the car. Before the church steps. Before Kaelen had walked through the estate gate and into the rain. Someone had anticipated this moment before Kaelen himself had committed to it. He turned. Luceran stood near the entrance. Coat still on. Watching him process the room with the same stillness he brought to every space he occupied. "How long has this been ready?" Kaelen said. Luceran held his gaze without hesitation. 8 months. 8 months ago, Kaelen had still been at that dining table. Still placing dinners there was some diminishing part of him that believed if he just kept showing up, Thorne would eventually turn back toward him. Still telling himself the distance was temporary. Still performing the daily maintenance of a relationship that had already quietly decided to stop. And Luceran had been building this room. "I'm not a project," Kaelen said. His voice came out steadier than the rest of him felt. "No." Luceran removed his coat. Folded it over the chair by the entrance with the precision of a man who keeps everything in exactly the place it belongs. "You are the only person who lived in that house who was never treated like one." The words were quiet. Too quiet. They landed anyway. Kaelen looked at the locked door. Then at Luceran. "Is this protection?" He paused. Let the next word carry what it needed to carry. Or is this something else? Luceran met his eyes. Held them for long enough that the question stayed in the air between them, fully acknowledged. "That is a fair question," he said. He didn't answer it. He walked to the kitchen instead. Filled a glass with water. Set it on the low table in front of Kaelen without drawing attention to the gesture. "There is a doctor scheduled for 6 in the morning. You should sleep before then." His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Something moved across his face, small, contained, but real. A tightening at the jaw. The particular shift of a man whose calculations have just changed. He turned slightly toward the window. "They found the location," he said. Quietly. Not for Kaelen. More like something said aloud to confirm it was real. Kaelen felt the temperature in the room change in a way that had nothing to do with the climate control. "Who found it?" Luceran's hand closed around the phone. "Someone who was not supposed to know you were here." The first impact didn't come from outside the building. It came from below, the lower parking structure, A muffled, pressurized sound that traveled up through the building's frame and arrived at the penthouse windows as a low vibration. At 2:47 in the morning, Kaelen was awake when it happened. He hadn't slept. Had been sitting in the far corner of the couch in the dark, one hand resting on his stomach, cycling through the same 3 thoughts with no resolution available for any of them. The second vibration hit harder. Luceran came out of the side room in under 15 seconds. Dark shirt, no coat, phone already in one hand, and something held low in the other that disappeared behind his back before Kaelen could identify it. "Stay here." No aggression in it. No raised voice. Just the specific delivery of someone who has been in situations like this before and knows exactly which words get through fastest. "What is happening?" Someone tracked the vehicle registration. He was already moving to a door panel on the far wall, a keypad Kaelen had not noticed before. His fingers moved across it fast. Steel shutters began descending over the floor-to-ceiling windows, sealing the room from outside. "2 individuals in the lower structure. My team has them." "Your team." Kaelen had heard those words from Thorne dozens of times. They always carried a specific weight, the implication of infrastructure, of systems that operated in the background of every room. He had not expected them from Luceran. Movement in the stairwell now. Fast. Close. One sharp sound, compressed, controlled, and then a silence that was denser than the noise before it. Luceran didn't react. He stood at the door, phone in hand, counting seconds with his eyes. The phone buzzed. He read it. 2 handled. 1 left the structure. His jaw tightened. The one who left is the one that matters. Kaelen stood up slowly. Who sent them? Luceran turned. His face was controlled in the way a face is controlled when the thing beneath it is not calm at all but has been trained, over years, to present as calm regardless. I need you to sit down, he said. Luceran. Kaelen. His voice dropped. Not louder. Precisely lower. Please. That word. From this man. In this room. With that particular weight underneath it. It landed differently than anything else said tonight. Kaelen sat. Luceran moved to the shuttered window and stood with his back to the room for a moment, the specific posture of someone deciding how much truth to deliver and in what order. When he turned around, his face had settled into something that looked like a decision that had already been made. One of the men said something before my team reached him. He paused. He said the order came from the third brother. The room went completely still. Kaelen looked at him. One word. Already knowing it. Already not wanting to know it. Kaelen. Luceran said nothing. He didn't need to. Kaelen Vael had always been the easiest of the 3 brothers to be around. That had never been accidental. Warm when it served him. Attentive in exactly the ways that left people feeling chosen. The kind of man who remembered details. Your preferred drink, the name of your childhood neighborhood, the anniversary of something you mentioned once in passing, and deployed them at precisely the right moment to make you feel like you occupied real space in his mind. Kaelen had genuinely liked him. That fact, sitting directly in front of him now, at 3 in the morning, in a shuttered room while Luceran laid out the architecture of what Kaelen had actually been building, landed in Kaelen's stomach with a weight that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. Luceran didn't soften it. Kaelen had identified the problem 18 months ago. Not Kaelen as a person, Kaelen as a position. Bonded to the Alpha King. Carrying first succession rights under Vael dynasty law. And now, though Kaelen had only suspected it, not confirmed it, potentially carrying a child whose standing would supersede any future heir from the other brothers. Kaelen wanted the succession. Had wanted it long before tonight. Had wanted it in the careful, patient way people want things they've decided to take rather than request. So he had arranged pieces. Trayvon Ash, selected specifically, paid specifically, briefed specifically on how to make the bound pheromones visible and impossible to dismiss. Guided carefully into Thorne's orbit over 8 months until proximity became habit, became the kind of distraction that doesn't feel like manipulation because it feels like choice. He hadn't manufactured Thorne's emotional neglect. He had identified it, studied it, and fed it, quietly, consistently, while standing next to Kaelen at dinners and asking how he was doing. There was a difference between causing damage and accelerating it. Both were deliberate. He needed you gone, Luceran said. Not visibly removed, that would have created legal complications and drawn attention. Gone quietly. Voluntarily. With no formal separation filed, no contested standing, no record. Just an omega who left on his own and couldn't be located. He paused. Then the child would have no recognized legal position under dynasty law. And the succession path would shift. Kaelin's voice came out completely flat. He knew about the pregnancy. He suspected. Couldn't verify. Luceran looked at him without moving his expression. Until you left the estate tonight carrying a bag that contained a medical document with a gestational date printed on it. The man who ran from the parking structure was not there to hurt you. He was there to confirm. Kaelen closed his eyes. 8 full seconds. Then opened them. Thorne. He said it the way you handle something you're not sure is still intact. Did Thorne know any part of this? Luceran was quiet for a moment. That moment carried its own answer. I do not believe Thorne knew Cassiel's involvement, he said finally. I believe Thorne was managed. Strategically redirected every time his attention might have moved toward you with any real clarity. The neglect was real, but it was also being cultivated from the outside. That is not the same as innocent. No. Luceran's voice didn't shift a single degree. It is not. Kaelen stood. Walked to the shuttered window. He couldn't see outside. Couldn't see the rain or the city or anything except flat steel. And in the small gap where the light caught the edge, a thin reflection of himself. Pale. Steady. Holding together through mechanics rather than comfort. A knock at the penthouse door. 2 short. 1 long. Luceran's shoulders shifted, a movement so controlled it barely qualified as movement. That is my contact from the east entrance. He moved toward the door. He does not use that pattern unless something has changed. He opened the door. A man Kaelen didn't know. Broad, quiet, the kind of person whose job description is written entirely in posture, leaned in and spoke 4 words. Thorne is outside. Alone. Kaelen didn't move. Luceran turned from the door and looked at him, not making the decision, not leaning toward one outcome. Just waiting. With the same patience he had brought to every moment of this night. That was the thing Kaelen kept coming back to. In the Vael estate, every decision that touched his life had been made by someone else. What events required his presence? What tone was appropriate for which room? Even his silences had been managed, shaped by the specific social architecture of living inside someone else's authority for 3 years. Luceran was waiting for him to decide. Let him in, Kaelen said. 60 seconds later, the door opened. Thorne Vael walked through it looking like a man who had driven across a city in a storm without a driver or backup or any advanced communication. Because all of those things would have given Luceran time to move Kaelen somewhere else before he arrived. He had come alone. That choice, that specific, deliberate choice, mattered. He stopped when he saw Kaelen standing in the center of the room. Fully stopped. The way a person stops when reality presents them with something their body needs a second to process as real. Kaelen. Just his name. No case built in advance. No argument prepared. No authority leveraged. Just His name, spoken with something raw underneath it that Thorne had not let into his voice in a very long time. Kalin looked at him for a long moment. "You smell like the rain," he said. Thorne exhaled. "I drove fast." "I know." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything the room had been holding since the night began. Luceran stood near the far wall. Not positioned between them, off to the side, present without inserting. The restraint in that choice was visible, if you were paying attention. And it cost him something. That was also visible, if you were paying attention. Thorne did not look at his brother. "I need to explain." "No," Kaelen said. Not loud. Not heated. Just clear. The way a boundary sounds when it has been thought through completely rather than spoken in reaction. "You don't need to explain tonight, Thorne. You needed to explain 2 years ago. A year ago. 6 months ago. Any one of the 100 evenings I sat across from you and waited, actually waited, for you to look at me like I still occupied real space in your life." Thorne's jaw worked. He said nothing. That silence, the absence of the argument Thorne Vael was fully capable of constructing, was more significant than anything he could have said. "You didn't lose me tonight," Kaelen said. Each word placed with precision. "You lost me every single day you stopped choosing me. Tonight was just when I finally stopped pretending you hadn't." The room held that statement. Thorne's hands opened at his sides. "I didn't know about Cassiel." His voice came out rough at the edges, the specific roughness of a man who has been moving fast through a city and an emotional reckoning simultaneously. "I need you to know that. Whatever else is true, I need you to know that one thing. Luceran told me." "Do you believe it?" Kaelen looked at him for a long time. "I believe you didn't plan it." A beat. Long enough to mean something. "I don't know yet if that's enough." Thorne moved one step closer. He stopped, consciously, visibly stopped, when Kaelen neither stepped back nor stepped toward him. Held that distance. "The child," he said, quietly. Not as leverage. As something that had only just become real to him minutes ago, and was still landing. "Is the child?" "Mine," Kaelen said. "Only mine. Until you earn something different. And then." Before Thorne could answer, before Luceran could move, Kaelin's hand went flat to his stomach. His face changed. Not fear. Something more immediate than fear. Something physical and specific and completely outside the conversation. "Luceran." His voice dropped. Controlled even now. "Call the doctor." The birth took 4 hours. Not in a hospital. In the back bedroom of the penthouse, with the doctor Luceran had kept on 24-hour call for the past 3 months, 2 nurses who arrived within 12 minutes and asked no questions, and a storm outside that did not ease until the sky began going gray at the edges. Thorne stood in the hallway for every one of those 4 hours. He did not pace. Did not make calls. Did not reach for any of the leverage or infrastructure or systems that had defined his authority for the past decade. He stood. Still. Like a man who had arrived, somewhere in the middle of the longest night of his life, at the understanding that there are rooms you do not simply walk into because you have decided you belong there. Luceran sat in the chair beside the entrance. One leg crossed. Watching the hallway and the closed door and his brother simultaneously, with the particular quality of attention he brought to situations that required him to be ready for multiple outcomes at once. At 4:52 in the morning, the bedroom door opened. The doctor stepped into the hallway. Looked at both of them without drama. Healthy. Both of them. Thorne's eyes closed. 1 second. One full, unguarded, completely human second. Then he straightened. The doctor stepped aside. Thorne looked at Luceran. Luceran looked back. Neither spoke. Thorne walked in first, slowly, in the specific way a person moves towards something they are not certain they have the right to approach. The room was warm, low-lit. It smelled like antiseptic, and underneath that, something softer and harder to name. Kalin was sitting up against the pillows, more tired than Thorne had ever seen him, and Thorne had watched Kalin hold himself together through years of cold silence and isolation and quiet damage, so that was a meaningful observation. Cradled against his chest, wrapped in a small blanket, was the child. Still. Breathing. Small fist curled against one cheek with the complete, unimpressed composure of someone who had just arrived and was reserving judgment. Thorne stopped at the foot of the bed. He didn't reach out. He waited. Kalin looked at him, the long, specific look of someone reading something that will change things either way, before they've committed to turning the last page. Then, quietly, "Come here." Thorne moved. Sat at the edge of the bed. Looked down at his son for the first time. Dark hair, completely still, already somehow carrying a weight of presence that didn't match his size, and said nothing for a long time. Not because he had nothing to say. Because nothing he had was adequate to the moment. Then, from the doorway, Luceran's voice. Low. Precise. Directed at Thorne specifically, the way a final statement is directed at the person who most needs to hear it. "Protection is not the same thing as love," he said. "And regret is not the same thing as repair." A pause. "You have a son now. Figure out the difference. While there is still time to." Thorne looked up. Luceran's expression was what it always was, controlled, unreadable, built over years of deciding what to show and what to keep. But his hands. In the low light of that room, at nearly 5 in the morning, his hands were not entirely steady. He turned. Walked out of the room. The door stayed open behind him. Thorne looked back down at the child. Kalin watched Thorne. The rain outside had finally stopped. The city had gone to that particular quiet it only finds in the last hour before dawn, when the night crowd is done and the morning hasn't started yet and the streets belong to no one. Inside that room, between 3 men and one new life and years of damage that had finally, honestly named itself. Nothing was resolved. Nothing had been forgiven. No promises had been made. But something that had been sealed shut. By neglect and silence and the specific cruelty of being made to feel invisible by the one person who was supposed to see you most clearly. Cracked open. Just slightly. Just enough to let something through. And sometimes, just enough is where it starts. Some bonds break. And some, the ones worth anything, break and then ask to be rebuilt from the ground up, with honesty instead of convenience. And no more shortcuts taken at someone else's expense. If this story reached something real in you, if you recognized something in Kalen's quiet walk out that door, or in Thorne's 4 hours standing in a hallway, or in Luceran's 8 months of building a room nobody asked him to build, drop a comment below. Tell us which moment hit you hardest. Your words in that comment section might be exactly what someone else needs to read tonight. If you believe this story deserves to reach more people, share it. One share. That's all it takes to put it in front of someone who might need it right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. More stories are coming, stories built around survival, around dignity, around the kind of love that doesn't ask you to disappear in order to keep it. Don't miss what comes next.